and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Paul Rook, and as always, we are joined by Kerry Greenaway and Richard Clements. Both stupendous people.
I love that. He always gets the stupendous in.
Have to. Got to do that. It's tradition.
I love it. I love it.
So, how's your week been?
Well, I have to put in. I work in retail. Did you not know this, guys? I work in retail, and it's.
Do you know, I had a funny sneaking suspicion that you worked in retail.
I know.
I should imagine it's quite difficult this time of the year.
It's Christmas. Did you not know this?
It's not Christmas yet.
Well, everyone's acting like it's Christmas, and they've been locked up for a month in the UK, so it's like gone frenzied. Frenzied is all I can say. Frazzled.
I think, to be fair, this year really is a non-starter. We could just write this off. So I think everyone that had a birthday this year should just scrap it and then just go back to what you was the year before.
Sweet.
So in 2021, you're really.
Oh right, yeah, I see. And perhaps that's a good idea. We can all knock a year off our. Yeah.
Yeah. We should all knock a year off our ages.
Yeah, I'm up for that. I knock years off anyway. I don't need an excuse.
Yeah, so you can go back down to 62, couldn't you?
No, I go back down to 20 and be 21 again next year. For the third year running.
Yeah.
How's your week been, Richard?
Yeah, it's been okay. Yeah, I've been flat tidying, sort of after a sort of long period of lockdown and stuff. It's surprising, really, sort of the amount of toot and stuff. You get a bit lethargic and stuff, and you sort of things do start sort of appearing in and around the bin, not quite in it, and stuff.
Yeah. See, now I've got this burning question for you, Richard.
Right.
On social media, you posted up a post that said you was obviously having your once a year tidy up or whatever, and you said it was like amazing how you found items, and you posted a picture of a Quavers packet.
Yes.
What was that about? Where was what?
I found that in the airing cupboard of all places.
Ah, okay.
For the life of me, I don't know how it got there. I mean, I do like Quavers. I mean, so it would have been me that ate them, but quite how they ended up with all my laundry, freshly washed laundry in the airing cupboard, I don't know.
I think Peter the Poltergeist put it there.
Yeah, probably. There is a few strange things going on in my flat, yeah, and I think perhaps a bit of poltergeist activity could explain that.
Well, I'll have to get John Fraser on to explain just one of those things. Do you remember the jots?
Yes, that's right, the jot.
Yeah, just one of those things. A Quavers packet ended up in my airing cupboard. It doesn't actually give you a very good impression, though, Richard. I will say this: your once a year clear up.
Well, yeah, it just happened to be there, really. So I thought, oh, okay, but I won't read too much into it. Yeah. Thanks for telling everyone. Anyway,
what a message would Spirit be giving you for putting in a Quavers packet in the airing cupboard?
No. And for people that are listening,
tidy up more, maybe.
Yeah, and for people that are listening that aren't familiar, sort of perhaps our American audience, it's like a chip packet, a packet of chips, empty. So, yeah, I don't know. Perhaps people can message me and explain.
What spiritual message is in that? I'm sure someone will come up with some weird ideas. I've seen quite some weird ideas going out there on social media recently, and it never ceases to fascinate me where people get these ideas from. But hey ho, let's not go down that rabbit hole.
No, exactly. And I think like in last week's show, we talked about Balmoral and the controversy surrounding Queen Victoria and her servant John Brown. So let's just disappear down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that.
Let's do that. So much more exciting.
Well, it's well known, isn't it, that in the Victorian period there was a massive surge in spiritualism, and it fascinates me that at that period of time we had this, and it's so influential. Actually, when you actually look at it, we haven't moved on that far, really. we've got bells and whistles, we've got loads of gadgets now that have moved with the times, but in regards to how we investigate or how we perceive in our belief systems, a lot of them are actually focused back, these are when these ideas were born, were back in the Victorian time. So it's fascinating to me that we still have haven't quite evolved, as it were, in our belief system regarding spirit. When we look at the Victorian period and then what we perceive today, I think there's a huge correlation, and I think it's something that needs to be we need to be aware of, actually, in regards to, we don't tend to get the big characters now. We get the big paranormal teams and the big paranormal, investigators and the TV personalities and all that. But in regards to, like, the big mediums and the big seers and the big prophets and, those kind of influential people, we kind of don't.
No, I think we tend to get more like Sharon from Facebook.
We do.
Yeah, it's good old Sharon.
And she knows everything. Or Tracy from Facebook or something like that, and they're sort of like the celebrities of the day.
Yeah, but it's a very interesting thing you sort of say there, sort of like we've probably moved on a bit more in like investigating techniques, but the sort of what we think is behind all this hasn't really sort of changed. Sort of principally, anyone would sort of say, you sort of mention the word, what is a ghost to anyone? And they will say it's the spirit of a dead person, and that's never really been proven. Yeah.
But let's look at the Victorian period in itself. It's an incredibly interesting time. It was like the time of massive scientific and technological progress, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. It was sort of... it was a very sort of, it was the height. I mean, I don't think the UK has ever reached that sort of height before, because everything was coming together. You look at the empire, you look at our industrial prowess and stuff. I mean, everything was moving. It must have been sort of quite a exciting time to actually live through, But alongside that, you had this undercurrent of a belief in the supernatural, paranormal, which seems to be at odds, but it was very big.
So what was going on then? Because usually we get a surgence of this when there's a lot of death around and stuff like that. I mean, obviously Queen Victoria kind of is like the head figure of that, because obviously when Albert dies, that's in 1861, she goes into a 12-year mourning period, which puts that in the forefront of everybody's mind. Oh, poor Victoria, mourning and stuff like that. And obviously, we see a lot of that's where the black dresses and the jet comes in, and we look at Victorian burial practices and stuff like that, and it's going into spirit photography and that, which we're not actually going to talk about tonight, but because we want to sort of focus on some of the characters and why we've got belief systems set in place from this time. But when we look at that period in history, do you find we've romanticised it, the Victorian period?
Yeah, possibly, yes. I mean, you mentioned the Victorian period. To anyone, us included, we do have a sort of quite a fixed sort of view of it, and that would be sort of based on Dickensian sort of novels and stuff like that, sort of Jane Austen and stuff, and even though that's sort of a bit earlier, but I think we probably don't know quite their psyche. But it's interesting what you say, Kerry, Queen Victoria's sort of 12-year mourning period and stuff. Back in those days, I mean, the sort of state of the nation, the public sort of psyche of the nation was very much attached to what the monarch was doing and thinking and sort of stuff like that. And I think, perhaps this might have something to do with it after the death of Albert. I mean, the whole population here in the UK especially, sort of took on Queen Victoria's sort of melancholy, should I say.
Well, we were talking about this before, weren't we, about her relationship with John Brown. And I came across a reference that not only did she marry him, but there was a reason why she got so close to him, was that he was supposed to be, allegedly, and there is no proof of this, but a spirit medium, and that he was giving messages from Albert to Victoria. And when I sort of looked into that relationship with Albert and Victoria, he seemed to be quite controlling, actually.
Who's this, Prince Albert?
Yeah. He would tell her what to wear and, you know, all sorts of things he used to do.
Yeah.
And, like what she was wearing, he'd say, oh, no, I don't like that. Go and get changed.
Oh, yeah. Oh, she knew her place, didn't she?
Oi! She's the queen, for God's sakes.
Yeah, well, you know, she was obviously besotted with the guy. You know, I know she wanted him involved in everything. And to be the sort of spouse of a monarch, you know, either way, you know, but particularly to be like the husband to a queen, I mean, that is sort of, you know, you don't really have a lot to do. I mean, you're just there, you know, sort of in the background, but I think Victoria wanted to incorporate him in a lot. And he was a very forward-thinking man, and he was probably the driving force behind the Victorian age.
He was, wasn't he? He was very instrumental in the railway.
Yes, the railways.
Because when the railway came along, Queen Victoria really weren't that bothered and interested with it.
No, but
when there was a line put in somewhere in, I think, wasn't it Derbyshire, to help with the industrial areas, Prince Albert had to go on the railway, and he just turned around to her and said, "Oh, you're going to love it. It's fantastic."
Yeah.
And then after that, after she tried, it was like, well, hey, let's put that in the whole country.
Because if it wasn't for Albert, I think Queen Victoria would have been sort of just another sort of dowdy sort of monarch, you know, sort of, you know, very traditionalist and stuff like that. But I think with Prince Albert's influence, you know, he brought these ideas forward, you know, because his great achievement was the Great Exhibition, you know, Crystal Palace. He brought all, and that was all his idea. He brought all these sort of great minds together and sort of showcased the industrial might and stuff like that. And he got his wife to give it all the blessing. And if the Queen went along and was seen, as Paul said, riding a train, stuff like that, everyone else would do it.
So running alongside all this technological and scientific forays, we've also got this spiritualist movement going on. Now, I wanted to have a look. So, where did that begin? And it actually quite surprised me that it actually began in America. It actually came from America over to us in the Fox Sisters.
Yeah,
that was sort of, that's generally agreed that was the beginning of the modern spiritualist movement. I mean, don't get me wrong, everybody, before everyone goes, oh no, but there was stuff beforehand. There was a lot of stuff beforehand, but they tended to be individual people, whereas this created an explosion of interest in the everyday person, not just the academia. Do you know what I mean? So it became more, because these girls were just like normal middle class girls, you know what I mean? That it became more accessible to people. Now, before we look at the Fox Sisters, which is a fascinating tale in itself, to be fair, wanted to have a quick look, going back a little bit further, as to some of the influences that were coming through, because the ideas were out there. The ideas of spiritualism, were out there. Now, there's plenty beforehand. We have to look at the ideas of Franz Anton Mesmer. Now, this fascinated me, actually. Now, he is an 18th century Australian healer. He went to America, and basically he said that everything in the universe, including the body, was governed by a magnetic fluid that could become imbalanced, which could cause illness. Now, this is, right. India and Asia and those areas had already thought of this was ongoing. This goes back a lot further. But this is where it becomes like more westernised, I suppose. And he reckoned that by putting his hands over a body, like over a patient, he could manipulate that force and restore health. So, like, basically, it's what we call the meridian lines that run through your body and the chakra points and all that side of it, you know, and he's working with that. Now, that actually came back off somebody earlier whose ideas were, now this fascinated me, because, you know, we talk about fluid and the moon and the planets and does it affect us and blah, 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 and there's no scientific proof for that. Well, this idea actually came off the back of a guy called Richard Mead, who said the gravitational attraction of the planets affected human health because of this invisible force affecting this invisible fluid that's inside the body. But Mesmer took it one step further and called it a magnetic fluid and said that is what the problem was. Now, this sort of went down into mesmerisation and became a popular attraction at parties, and in parlours it became a parlour game.
Yeah, the parlour game.
I mean, how awful. You know, could be groundbreaking work and it becomes a parlour game for people. But it becomes a really fascinating, when you look into this, it becomes really fascinating area of study. So we're only going to touch on this tonight, because if you go and look into that a little bit more, then some of the research that was done it's a little worrying, actually, and it does make you wonder if there is a magnetic force between people that can affect people's behaviour and mental well-being, physical well-being as well.
See, there was a study conducted with A&E hospitals in regards to full moon. And we all know, like, the water is affected by the full moon. And it does show that there is an increase of patients, especially aggressive ones and strange patients. Not as it like in a mental illness type of strange, but more like personality type of strange. And so there is a rise in it, definitely.
Well, my teacher friend, she can pretty much guarantee she knows when the full moon is. And she doesn't really follow moon cycles like I do. Do you know what I mean?
No, that's because she turns into a werewolf.
Because, yeah, she grows extra hair. No, because the way the kids are acting. They seem to go, she goes, they go off the scale. She said, like, in their behaviour, like they're all over the place. So whether or not it does have an effect,
talked about, hasn't it? I mean, and it's sort of one of these sort of unwritten. Nobody's sort of, it seems they can't sort of study it. That it sort of seems a bit of an enigma, but it's something sort of generally in the undercurrent is accepted that happens, isn't it?
It is.
Well, no, they have done a study on it.
Yeah, but that proved inconclusive. Yeah. The actual scientific study they did actually did prove inconclusive.
It's pretty conclusive to me. I've experienced it, so I know.
Oh no! Don't get me wrong. A lot of people in the business, in the medical industry, and doctors and that will say that. But when they actually did a scientific study of it and actually tried to pin it down to see if there was a correlation, then it was very inconclusive. So who knows, right? Yeah. Maybe it is this strange magnetic force, and it does have an effect. But as I say, when they actually did a scientific study on it, it did prove inconclusive. But it's one of those, isn't it? It's one of those where we all kind of know we're a little different. I mean, I work, in case you didn't notice, I work in retail and it's Christmas. And it's mad. But we do know it's a change in behaviour around a full moon. We'll get more aggressive customers, more customer complaints around a full moon. Usually 3 days, the day before, the day, and the day after. So I don't disagree with what you're saying, Paul, but it's anecdotal.
Yeah.
Because scientifically, they haven't actually been able to prove a correlation. It's very interesting. Anyway, so some who awakened from this mesmeric trance that you would put them in reckoned that they had visions of spirits from another dimension. So it brought into the spirit realm as well. Now, is that an archetypal type coming forward that they're experiencing, or is it a spirit? Who knows, right?
Hallucination.
That's all right.
I take it when you talk about sort of putting in a mesmeritic state, that is what? Hypnotism.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's the same principles
of
that. A bit like when you go to one of these shows where they make you act like a chicken or something. Now, around the same time, the ideas of Emanuel Swedenborg. Now, guys, you must remember we spoke to William Parry, didn't we? Who was talked about the ideas of Swedenborg. Now, he was a Swedish philosopher and a mystic, and he described the afterlife as having 3 heavens and 3 hells and an interim destination. Now, this reminds me of Dante.
Well,
see, these thoughts and feelings all kind of tying through together, aren't they? These ideas are there. They're out there already. People are, as I say, when we go into the Victorian period, none of these ideas were brand spanking new. They'd all been flouted around before. But it was the Victorian period kind of took those ideas and ran with them, whereas before they'd been talked about but not really embraced by the mass, as it were.
No, they were sort of like the reserve of sort of like the academic and, sort of just people generally interested. I suppose they couldn't really see any sort of sale value in it. And again, going back to the Victorian era, it's sort of, it was the birth of commercialism, sort of mass media and stuff like that. So, again, you can see the correlation of why it really took off.
And these are influences that are coming into the Victorian period from post-Victoria, basically. Now, basically, he went on to describe that time of where you go Passover and you go into this purgatory state, would we call it? A waiting state?
Well, and that's what I thought when I saw it. He split it into three one side, three the other side, and a waiting area, which is a sort of, and you can see he's taking it from sort of like the Christian viewpoint.
Now, we had another one, American seer Andrew Jackson Davis. Now, he would become known as John the Baptist of modern spiritualism, combined the two ideologies, and he reckoned, now get this one, that Swedenborg's spirit spoke to him through a series of mesmeric trances. Now, he recorded these messages and in 1847 published them in a huge book entitled The Principles of Nature, Her Divine Revelations and a Voice to Mankind.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Now,
oh
my God, that's a troll through, that is. It's like, snores fest. But, it's still an influence. Now, keep that name in mind because that comes relevant in regards to what we're then going to go on to talk about. Okay? So you've got all these influences coming through. So let's talk about the Fox sisters. Now, there is a link to all of this, everybody, so you'll have to bear with us. But let's talk about the Fox sisters, because this is a fascinating tale. And as I say, this is generally regarded as the birth of modern spiritualism. So, guys, what do we know about the Fox sisters?
Well, they were sisters, and they were all foxes. They lived in America somewhere, I don't know. And they were witches.
Right.
Apparently.
Witches?
Where did you get that bit from?
They had the nose and they like going out in hats.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's where we're going with that, is it?
Yeah.
Right, okay. Richard?
They had the nose for it. All right.
I'm sorry, I was and that's thrown me, But, and they were two young girls, and they were living in a farmhouse and how do you pronounce it? Haydensville in Hydesville in New York State, and and this all really sort of just started off one night, sort of one day in March 1848, when Margaret, whose name was shortened to Maggie, and Kate, her older sister, and a neighbour was involved in this, and they were eager to share a frightening experience they had.
Yeah,
and,
basically at night time, they said that they heard a series of raps, good old...
Yeah.
And that seemed to manifest. And they said it had intelligence. So when they asked it questions, it would answer the questions in regards to a rap, yeah? Knock once for yes and twice for no, everybody.
That is probably quite a familiar sort of term to people, the sort of spirit rappings, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Now, the neighbour, obviously very sceptical, wanted to come to see for herself, so they joined them in the bedroom that night, and her mother joined them as well. Right. Now, when you read about this, you kind of think, look at the date for a start. It's the last day in March. What follows the last day in March?
April Fool's Day. That's April.
But, let's take it for what it was. She ordered them to count 5, and the thuds counted 5. She said 15, And they did. Then they said, tell me the neighbour's age. 33 raps followed. Got it right. If you're an injured spirit, manifest it by 3 raps. And it did.
I think anyone that's sort of listening to this who, we've all sort of done this, and it's to some degree of success, but for a one-off, for a first-time sort of demonstration, I'm looking at that, and that does sound too good to be true.
Wow. Have we ever experienced anything like that when we've been investigating or talking to spirit?
No, I don't like rap music. So I don't do this rapping stuff.
It just...
Anyway, the girls weren't overly worried by this, but the mother was quite disturbed, shall we say. So she sent the girls off to their older sister, Leah Fox, who lived in Rochester.
See? And that's a witch's name and all.
Now, while she was there, the tale of what happened and why the girls had ended up living with Leah came out, and the community leaders, Isaac and Amy Post, were actually intrigued. They were like, ooh, this sounds fun.
Ooh,
right?
Let's go and have a look.
Now, there was a rumour that the girls had said that the spirit that they'd been talking to was actually a peddler who had been murdered in the farmhouse 5 years beforehand. Right? So they wanted to, examine things a little bit further. So the Post invited the girls to a gathering at their home to see if they could communicate with spirits in another locale. As you do, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, of course you do.
Now, oh dear. Isaac and Amy Post have actually stated, I suppose I went in with as much unbelief as Thomas felt when he was introduced to Jesus after he had ascended. Right, but he said he was very swayed by very distinct thumps under the floor and several apparent answers. He was further convinced when Leah, proved to be a medium, communicated with Post's recently deceased daughter. So now we've got 3 in now.
Yeah.
We've got the 3 sisters involved now.
Yep.
So the Posts were like, oh, we can make money out of this.
Yeah, enterprising.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it all boils down to.
They rented the largest hall in Rochester. 400 people came to hear the mysterious noises. Then afterwards, Amy Post accompanied the sisters to a private chamber where they disrobed and were examined by a committee of skeptics who found no hoax. No evidence of a hoax, should I say.
Okay.
Right. Now, going back to Mr. Davis, Andrew Jackson Davis, yeah? He heard about this and he thought, well, everything I've said is coming to the fore. I was right. Hey, he believed that his prediction had materialised a year later on the very day the Fox sisters first channeled spirits in their bedroom. Uncanny the dates, right?
Yeah.
It was a year after I predicted that the Fox sisters stepped forward. Now, he said that about daylight on that morning, a warm breathing passed over my face and I heard a voice, tender and strong, saying, "Brother, the good work has begun. Behold, a living demonstration is born." So now, we haven't just got these 3 sisters doing their thing, hoax or not. We've now got somebody very influential, a seer, putting his weight behind the girls and their relevancy, making them more credible.
Yeah, sort of like, the prophet has come along, and sort of taken them under his wing, which must have benefited him a lot.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? They both benefit out of that, don't they? Yeah,
of course they do.
Mm.
Now, Davis actually invited the Fox sisters to his home in New York City and to witness it for himself. He was like, well, I've got to check this out. And basically, that's what elevated him from an obscure prophet guy to a recognised leader of a mass movement off the back of these 3 girls. Now, Maggie, Kate and Leah then embarked on a professional tour to spread the word of spirits. Right? Now, do you remember we talked about this in the Barnum show?
Yes, we did, yes.
And there's always that confusion, isn't it? That P.T. Barnum had them, had influenced the Fox sisters. That's not true. It was his cousin who owned the Barnum Hotel on the corner of Broadway and Maiden Lane. So that's where they appeared, nothing to do with P.T. Barnum. And so if you go back and listen to the Barnum show, then you'll find, that's a well-known fact.
There's always this sort of undercurrent. So when you talk to people, they sort of say that Barnum was involved, but as you say, it wasn't the actual one. There's no sort of real sort of evidence to say that he ever did pay any attention to them, was there?
No. Now, the Scientific America, one of the editorials at the time, was like, really? Are we really going to buy into this? And called them the spiritual knockers from Rochester.
Spiritual.
Gotta love it, right? There's a sensationalised headline for you. And of course, in a headline like that, increases interest, right?
Well, of course it does.
Yeah. And regardless of how scathing they were trying to be, it actually was like, oh, spiritual knockers.
I sort of said a bit earlier about Barnum, and it's interesting that, because he, and I'm talking about PT, he would have sort of probably heard of it from his cousin, and there's no doubt, and he probably saw it and for what it was. And didn't bother to take it on. And for someone like Barnum to actually do that, considering what he did take on, is probably quite telling.
Well, we'll never know really what he thought of that, but maybe he did have his personal thoughts on that one. But they conducted their sessions, the girls, in the hotel's parlour. Now, around about 30 attendants happened at each time. Now, they worked hard. You can't deny that. If you're working spiritually, everyone out there who does work spiritually recognises how tiring it can be. Now, they did sessions at 10 a.m, 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. and doing private meetings in between as well. That's working constantly.
Yeah. And from what I can gather, I like sort of talking to people like yourself, Kerry, and sort of like the others. I sort of peripherally sort of know, that is one sort of common factor is, it does take a lot out of you.
Puts a lot of pressure on you. It really does,
Especially on the age of the girls as well. I mean, and today we would call it exploitation.
Paul?
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing, absolutely. Although I wonder how much it is to get a reading. Do one.
Well, at the time...
Do you reckon they still do them?
No, they're all dead now, I'm afraid. Spoiler alert, everybody.
Oh.
Now, the admission was only $1. I say only. It was quite expensive back then. It was $1.
I should imagine, it was.
But very famous people actually attended this. So you had very prominent members of New York society attending this. So, people were interested. Created a buzz.
Oh, yeah. And created a buzz. And if all the movers and shakers are popping along, that's going to generate the publicity and the interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, as I say, there was a lot of influential people that went to see them. Now, after this period in time, they wanted to go on a big tour, but Leah wasn't that bothered. She wanted to stay in New York. So she carried on entertaining people in the seance, what was called the seance room.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but Kate and Maggie went on and took the show to other cities. Now, they did, they covered quite a lot of America, really. Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus, St. Louis, Washington, Philadelphia. Now, it was in Philadelphia where Maggie attracted a suitor.
Oh, she fell in love.
She fell in love. To an explorer, Elisha Kent Kane.
Oh, right.
Or Elisha. Elisha? I would think it was something like Elisha for a man.
Yeah, Elisha, I should imagine, yeah.
Now, the interesting thing is, he always deemed her a fraud. He couldn't prove anything. He couldn't say how she was doing it, but he never bought into the hype, basically.
No, yeah. But doesn't that seem to be sort of typical in sort of like relationships when you get sort of someone quite, sort of spiritually in tune? They always seem to attract a partner that is probably, they can take it or leave it or don't pay any interest. The two do seem to go together for some bizarre reason.
Maybe there's a deep psychological thing that you want to prove your partner wrong.
Well,
so maybe that's the attraction.
Yeah.
Who knows?
God, she's off again. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he did a whole month of trials on them, and he said he couldn't make nothing of them. He said he didn't know how they were doing it. He said it was a great mystery. Now, Maggie was 13 years his junior, and he actually encouraged her to give up this life, basically, by saying it's by this suspected decept. And she did, basically. She retired. She attended school, married him, and then he died.
Right.
In 1857. Now, she then converted to Catholicism, and that was it, really. She then began to drink very heavily, but she vowed to keep her promise to her husband and forever abandoned spiritualism. Didn't do any favours. She took to alcoholism.
Yes. The tragic decline, isn't it? You know, sort of a prodigy or someone very young being thrust into the limelight. I mean, you look at, you know, even today, you look at some of the child actors past, I mean, and and they always go through a very tough time afterwards, don't they? Mm-hmm. Yeah, sort of same difference, I suppose.
I suppose it's not being able to. You're so young, aren't you?
Well, yeah.
So you get influenced, and then when that influence is taken away, you're left rudderless.
Well, yeah, you sort of see these child prodigies that are touted around today. You know, you get these sort of genius piano players who are something like, you know, sort of 9 or 10, you know, and they're sort of performing in front of huge audiences and stuff like that. I mean, that's got to be some pressure on them, and you know, because they're missing out on so much other. The driving force behind them is usually possibly perhaps parents, or their parents have been influenced by outside sort of agencies to get their children to perform, you know, which is all well and good, and they may be very talented, but they're missing out on so much more growing up.
So, well, you're not getting the foundation, are you?
No.
That's the problem. Now, Kate, on the other hand, she married a devout spiritualist and continued to develop her medium powers. Now, she was translating spirit messages in astonishing and unprecedented ways. She could communicate 2 messages simultaneously, writing one while speaking the other. That's amazing. Right? She was transcribing messages in reverse script.
Right.
She utilised blank cards upon which words seemed to spontaneously appear. So this is a very advanced mediumship.
It certainly seems so. I mean, but again, you sort of compare it to, you know, sort of people who claim the same today, you know, and this stuff does seem quite fantastical, you know. I mean, we all sort of like seeing the mediums work today, and I've never seen sort of, well, to my knowledge, producing stuff like they were back in this day.
But our lives are a lot busier. She is focused completely on her spiritualism.
Yeah,
she's married a devout spiritualist as well, so she's able to develop that. She's working continually spiritually. So she's sort of like got one foot in each realm, as it were, do you think? Without having to worry about going to work and...
Well, because... back then, when traditionally women wouldn't work, so she probably could have focused all her time on it. Whereas in today's sort of world, I mean, sort of people who are who do practices tend it is a sort of sideline. You get very few sort of professional mediums as such, don't you? I would say.
Or maybe they don't continue to develop. Maybe she was pushing the boundaries with it, with her skill, and just trying different things. I don't know the answer to that one. Anyway, during sessions with a wealthy banker, Charles Livermore, so she's attracting wealthy people, she managed to summon the man's deceased wife and the ghost of Benjamin Franklin. Now, he announced his identity by writing his name on a card. Very nice, thank you very much, Mr. Benjamin Franklin. And her business boomed.
Yeah, you have a dead president's autograph. Yeah, go for it.
Why not? Now, during and after the Civil War, obviously, the Civil War, there was a lot of deceased in that, and a lot of bereaved people left behind. And they want to... this is one thing as well. When we looked at the World War, there was an increase in spiritualism around the war times, for World War I and World War II as well. Because people... You're not with the person when they die. You want comfort that they are at rest, that they've, in horrible circumstances, they've died in that way. Yeah. But you want comfort. You need that. And a lot of people found solace in spiritualism and still do, even to this day, you know, under the circumstances. Now, prominent spiritualist Emma Harding wrote that the war actually added 2 million new believers to the movement.
Yeah, I can quite believe that. I mean, the American Civil War was a large, devastating conflict, and it really did rock the United States. And, I mean, and this was probably the first occurrence when there was a big war which saw this resurgence of spiritualism, and again, and we see it through other conflicts. I mean, the First World War is another good example, but there would have been a lot of people sort of obviously wanting news of their departed, because back then you wouldn't have, and if you went to war back then, you would have said goodbye to your loved one's family, wife and stuff, marched down the road, and if you didn't return, were killed. That was the last they ever saw of you.
Yeah, very much so.
Not like today's modern communications when soldiers are on you can, they've got telephones, you can phone up and have some sort of dialogue with your family when soldiers are posted abroad or stuff like that. But back then, you would have had virtually no communication apart from possibly the odd letter.
Exactly. Now, Kate herself, because she's so renowned now as a medium, you can imagine the pressure that put on her. And she was actually, the miracles that were expected from her, like summoning full-fledged apparitions at every single seance. You can imagine the drain that was on her. And, she ended up drinking herself. She ended up getting solace in alcohol.
Well, it burns them out, doesn't it? I think we've spoken before, sort of people very adept at spiritual sort of practices aren't usually the healthiest of people, are they?
Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, it does seem to be the way. Now, in October 1888, the New York World published an interview with Maggie Fox, right? Now, she said she was publicly denounced spiritualism. She was paid $1,500 for this exclusive. Her main motive was actually rage at her sister Leah and other leading spiritualists who had publicly chastised Kate for her drinking and accused her of being unable to care for her 2 young children. Now, Kate planned to be in the audience when Maggie gave her speech, which basically gives support to the theory that it's denounced, that we faked it all.
It seems that, they're playing cat and mouse with it, sort of, they've obviously developed into adults sort of through this period of time, sort of being married and stuff, and they are renowned for what they did before and possibly a bit afterwards, and they are probably aware of how to manipulate the crowd. They've learnt, and they're probably trying to sort of make money in their own right, if you know what I mean.
But you think Kate and Maggie haven't particularly succeeded particularly well. Leah is the only one that seems to be quite stable in this. Mm-hmm. She's still in a New York seance, isn't she, in her seance? Yeah. Taking lots of money, whereas poor old Kate and poor old Maggie are both now alcoholic burnouts.
Well, yeah, and you can see it's the classic sort of, resentment creeps in and everything, I mean, this has got all the ingredients of the sort of, something that starts off quite well-meaning and perhaps, innocently, evolving and deteriorating. I mean, and how many times do we see this in the modern world? Sort of pop bands get together, don't they? And and they're all having a great time, and then suddenly it all goes to hell in a handbasket.
No, I totally agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Now she says, this is Maggie. My sister Kate and myself were very young children when this horrible deception began. At night, when we went to bed, we used to tie an apple on a string and move the string up and down, causing the apple to bump on the floor, or we would drop the apple on the floor, making a strange noise every time it would rebound. Yeah. So they went from dropping apples to manipulating their knuckles, joints and toes. It makes me think they must have had arthritis. A great many people, when they hear the rapping, imagine at once that the spirits are touching them. So we get into a belief system. People believe that it's spirit. They're not looking for a logical explanation for this. And because they're doing it with their joints and stuff, it's very hard to prove that. Because they're not actually using an external thing to fake.
No.
They're using their own bodies.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose if you can learn that technique quite young, children are quite malleable and stuff like that. And if if we were to try it now, we probably couldn't because we're all sort of old and decrepit.
Oh, I don't know. I just got to get up from the floor and I pop and crack.
But if you sort of got into this habit really young and and developed it a bit, you could probably do it at will.
Mm. Well, you could. She said, it is a very common delusion. Some very wealthy people came to see me some years ago when I lived in 42nd Street, and I did some rappings for them. I made the spirit rap on the chair, and one of the ladies cried out, I feel the spirit tapping me on the shoulder. Of course, that was pure imagination. So it shows that people get caught up in the hype.
You do. There's a lot of sort of, people getting caught up in the hype, and I should imagine when you go and see a spiritualist medium, and there's a lot of pressure on the sitter as well to sort of like confirm what the medium's actually saying, so 6 of one and half dozen of the other.
Mm. Mm-hmm. I definitely think it is a belief system, and there's sort of people go to these sort of people for to communicate with spirit, so they've already got that belief there, and because they want to, it sort of happens. And you get this rapping noise, and you instantly jump to the conclusion that it is a spirit. You see it quite a lot in the paranormal field as well with some of these ghost hunting teams. They jump to those conclusions as well. Mm-hmm. It's just some of the sceptical people among us are like, hang on a minute, that's not quite right. Mm. We suspect.
Well, Maggie did offer a demonstration. She removed her shoe, placed her right foot upon a wooden stool, and was rewarded with a number of short little raps.
Okay.
Now, the New York Herald reported that working her big toe and solemnly declaring that it was in this way she created the excitement that had driven so many persons to suicide or insanity. One moment it was ludicrous, the next moment it was weird. Now, Maggie also insisted that her sister Leah knew that the rappings were faked all along and basically exploited the situation and her younger sisters. And before she exited the stage, she thanked God that she was able to expose spiritualism. Now, this literally split the field of spiritualism. You had obviously the mainstream press saying, this is a death blow to the movement. But spiritualism saying, hang on a minute, she's being influenced by a bad spirit to say this, basically. Well, so you've got this absolute split now.
Yeah, and both sides are not going to move, are they? So they just galvanise and sort of put their heads down, ready to lock horns. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's that belief system coming in again. I mean, the Spiritual Telegraph said the band of spirits attending during the early part of her career had been usurped by other unseen intelligences who are not as scrupulous in their dealings with humanity. The other side of this were people saying that Maggie's change of heart was actually completely mercenary. She had failed to make it make a living as a medium, and she just basically sought for profit. She was trying to get paid out of this.
Yeah, she's just going around just talking to anyone that was prepared to listen to her, I suppose.
Mm.
A year later, she took it back. She said, I'm sorry, my spirit guides have actually beseeched me to say that I do have contact with spirit. And, it's, again, a complete reversal of what she'd said up on stage.
Yeah.
Well, then no one believes her anyway.
So now you've got, it's one of those, isn't it? She said she's fake, but now she's saying she's not. But she's proved that she was fake because she did it on stage. But she's saying she's a medium. I don't know. It's awful, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, you can't really sort of make anything head nor tail because we only have the written documentation of all this in front of us, don't we? I mean, you really, to ascertain, we would have, I would have loved to sort of gone and sat in one of their sort of seances and listened to the rappings and seen the writings, but, we can't, can we? We only have the written information that's left.
Mm.
Yeah.
And to go on from that, she actually attended a debate at the Manhattan Liberal Club under a pseudonym of Mrs. Spencer, and she actually revealed several tricks of the profession, including the way mediums wrote messages on blank slates by using their teeth or their feet. She never reconciled with her sister Leah, and Kate died 2 years on a drinking spree. Maggie passed 8 months later, and actually after that, the Spiritualists formed the National Spiritualist Association. It's quite a tragic tale of the three sisters, to be fair.
Yes, I wasn't quite aware. I'd heard of the Fox sisters, and they're often quoted, but only sort of, the actual start of the story, when they were living in Rochester, and their little sort of farmhouse. I mean, I wasn't quite aware of the saga that was to unfold and throughout their lives.
Mm-hmm. Now,
sort of in a way, though, she's almost like the original paranormal investigator. She sort of gave birth to that way of thinking, because if she faked evidence, and then she told everyone how it was done, and she gave demonstrations on that. So by doing that, she's saying, some of these paranormal people are not genuine, and this is how you can tell. Look out for these sort of signs. So in a way, she's almost like giving birth to that sort of way of thinking. And as a paranormal investigator, it's like, some of the techniques she may have used or whatever has been passed down from investigator to investigator.
Yeah,
and might
sort of like
a
poacher turned gamekeeper.
Yeah.
Well, on a side note, in 1904, school children were playing in the home in Hydesville, New York, where they first started hearing these raps, as you do. It was known locally as the Spook House. Of course it was. Now, they discovered a skeleton between the earth and the crumbling cedar walls.
What?
A skeleton.
Okay.
Corrected it. A doctor was consulted who estimated that the bones were about 50 years old, which actually takes it back to the sister's tale of the murdered peddler, and that's who they were channeling initially, right?
Yeah.
Or did it?
Were these actually identified as human remains then?
Some of it.
Yeah.
But there was odds and ends. It wasn't a full skeleton as it was first reported. There was all sorts of odds and ends in there, and there was even chicken bones.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these old sort of farmsteads, sort of in the basement and stuff, or in, they would have been built on earth floors, and that's, they would have disposed of a lot of their sort of general sort of animal waste and stuff like that, sort of just chucked it down in the cellar so you can see, I've often heard stories when they go and excavate these sort of dirt floor, sort of crawl spaces underneath houses, particularly in the US, they do tend to find a lot of sort of bones. Not necessarily human, but it seems to be a place they do collect.
Well, there's places like that in the UK as well, because I mean, with some castles, they have like a raised. I'm sure it might even be the Tower of London. Is a bit like it. They have like a raised floor, and what they used to do, they'd eat on this raised floor, have their banquet there, and all the bones that they wouldn't eat, obviously, they'd throw them over the side.
Yeah.
And they collect underneath. And I don't know whether or not someone would sweep that out or what. I mean, I don't know, but...
Yeah.
The problem is, isn't it, we view this very modernised. We get rid of our waste in a certain way, whereas in the past, people didn't. They would chuck it outside on a dung heap or something.
In my airing cupboard.
In your airing cupboard, yeah. I mean, as you do. Now, the New York Times actually suggested that originally the girls were just playing on a folktale. We've talked about urban legends before. A peddler died 5 years ago and it's the spirit we're contacting. It's an urban legend. And there's no fact or, we don't know if there was a peddler that died. So the New York Times said it was just basically the girls were just playing on a folktale, so there's nothing to these bones. And another doctor, 5 years after they were first discovered, re-looked at them and said, "Nah, this is just normal. This is nothing special." And then there was a further rumour that someone actually planted the bones as a practical joke. So again, even that's like lost its credibility. The initial what started the Fox sisters actually lost its credibility there. So it's. I have to say, when I was reading up about the Fox sisters, I knew a bit. I knew that's pretty much where the seance parlour scenario came from. I knew that they had done a lot of spirit rapping, but I didn't know the tale. And I find it very tragic. And I don't know what to believe about it. Were they all genuine mediums who the pressure got to them, basically, apart from Leah, Kate and Margaret, and Maggie, should I say. They were drinking heavily at this stage. So when they're debunking it and saying, saying, nah, they were drinking. They needed money. They weren't making a living as a medium.
No, particularly back then, no. I mean,
so you've got to look at motive and intention, haven't you?
Yeah, I know a lot of people sort of, even today, they put a lot of faith in the Fox sisters, and a lot of people, don't. You sort of say, well, it's not, they rubbish it. I mean, I'm sort of pretty much on the fence. I mean, I've heard about them. I don't pay a lot of attention to the particular story. I think there are sort of more interesting cases out there to look at. But they've sort of left their sort of legacy as being the start point of this movement. So
the modern spiritualism movement.
Yeah, so that's not a bad legacy to sort of leave, I suppose. And even though the girls obviously had a lot of problems and troubles going through life.
And don't forget also, people are seeing the success at the early stages of the girls, and they're going, I can do that.
Well, yes.
And it gives birth to a whole genre of people coming out and doing that. Now, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back after the break, we're actually going to come all the way back to the UK, because that's where we want to be. That's what we're talking about, Victorian period and Queen Victoria and all that. And we're going to look at the emergence of the influence of this going off in America on the UK. So join us right after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK Radio Network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Now, before the break, we took a look, quite a long look actually, at the case of the Fox sisters. That's a case that's well talked about, shall we say, and actually birthed the seance parlour scenario, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, there's a lot of stuff you recognise what they're doing is sort of quite recognisable today, isn't it?
So we're coming back to the UK. Now, the influence the Fox sisters had we talked about this before the break, the emergence of a lot of people saying, well, I can do what they do. I can talk to spirit. Now, an American medium, Maria B. Hayden, visited London and actually offered her services as a medium. And now she conducted seances, table rapping, spirit messages for a guinea a head, 5 guineas for 10.
Well, bargain.
Okay. And this, as I say, this then exploded in the UK. We had a lot of people doing that. Now, a lot of people were doing this. This is, everybody started doing it. And you didn't have to have class to do this. And this is where the parlour game scenario, the parlour game seance sort of took entertainment, shall we say.
Yeah, to a new level.
Mm-hmm. Now, either Victoria and Albert had both participated in seances, and it's quite amazing, really, when you think about it, because Albert, Mr. Science, Mr., architect and forefront of the revolution that was going on, was part of this too. Now, they actually had clairvoyant Georgiana Eagle, who came to Osborne House on the Isle of Wight in 1846. So I had a look into Georgiana Eagle. Sorry. And this is the problem we have. we get confused. I think this is where people get confused with the whole scenario. Now, she was actually a female magician and a psychic performer, right? That's what she classed herself as. Her father was a celebrated magician, George Bernardo Eagle. He was known as the Wizard of the South. So she knows magic. And we're not talking magic. We're talking magic circle kind of magic.
Yeah, illusions. Magic tricks, basically.
Yeah. And then when you add hypnotism and mesmerisation into the mix...
Yep. You can see, you add a bit of the exotic.
Mm-hmm. Label it, market it. Everyone's doing it. I can charge a lot. I get in front of the Queen. That credibility, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm being too cynical myself here. But she did mind reading tricks as if they were real. She actually promoted herself as a clairvoyant medium. And she actually was doing this before, but the explosion she took advantage of that. Now, her second site was actually advertised as early as 1841. So that's before the Fox sisters.
Yeah, predates them, doesn't it?
But the mesmerisation and hypnotism, as we've said before, were out there already. So these are ideas that are already out there, and these people are taking those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so she made the most of her abilities as a hypnotist as well as her skills as a magician. Now, she was performing as the mysterious lady and the celebrated enchantress.
Sounds very exotic.
It does, doesn't it? Now, afterwards, after Albert died, she obviously wanted to Victoria wanted to contact her dead husband, and she went back to the Queen. And apparently we don't know what happened in that. I couldn't find any reference of what actually occurred, but she must have been quite good at what she did, because the Queen actually gave her a gold watch as thanks. And the inscription reads, presented by Her Majesty to Miss Georgiana Eagle for her meritorious and extraordinary clairvoyance produced at Osborne House.
See, I think with that, the only way we're going to find out what actually happened is when we get round to that stage of Victoria's life in the social... no, not social media.
It wasn't around then, babe.
The streaming services, when they bring out the next series of Victoria.
Possibly.
Who knows?
With any luck. Yeah,
who knows?
With any luck.
I mean, she got married and she continued to perform. So she was actually very successful at this, so she carried on doing it. The problem I have with Georgiana is, I'm not saying she wasn't a medium and didn't have some form of ability there, but she also had a lot of other tricks up her sleeve, as it were, to fool the audience. And that's the problem, isn't it, with this one?
Yeah, I mean, she knew the game, didn't she? I mean, she's obviously, sort of practiced in sort of stage magic, and I believe her father was a magician or something. So, so it was... and practicing magic is not just that. And if they were performers, she would have had very good knowledge of how to publicise, sell herself. So you can see all these underlying currents coming into a nice little package, and and just go out and sell it.
Which she clearly did.
Yes, she clearly did. Yeah,
but as I say, going back on the past influences of Mesmer and Swedenborg, that belief system coming through, that ability to affect people and go into a trance or put people into a trance by, this magnetic fluid, that sort of thing. Yeah, I'm not saying there's nothing. I'm not saying that's unfounded research. I'm not saying that's not a possibility of a factor. What I'm saying is they've used this to their own ability, their own advantage.
Well, yes. I mean, they've sort of seen it done, and if these stage performers, they would have had sort of, to perhaps, picking people out of the audience, sort of, so to speak. They could be plants, and it's not a great leap, to sort of get someone to fake being hypnotised, surely.
But there is a precedent here. We have a modern example of this in Darren Brown. Look at some of the work he does.
He's very,
very good at well, he classes it as psychological manipulation, doesn't he?
Yes, he is a magician or whatever. I mean, I do like watching Darren Brown stuff, and I don't like it because it just screws my head over, because I just do not know.
How does he do that?
How does he do that? But it is a magic trick at the end of the day. I mean, it's very good. But
it's psychological. It isn't really a magic trick as such. I mean, if you go to a majority of people in the UK and say, think of a number between 1 and 10, you'll find that a lot of them, most over half, would go for number 6.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of that, but
and that's sort of how it develops. So obviously, that's just a very basic example.
I mean, people like Darren Brown are looking for a lot of sort of underlying sort of psychological sort of triggers. I mean, things we all do, sort of looking to the left and looking down when, it's all that. And he must have to work hard, and he must have to.
But there's also there's also giving them power of suggestion as well.
Yeah, there's
just
all that.
Placing things in the right place so it's eye level, so that you know that they're going to see it, but not take that much notice. Yeah. If you said, like, I don't know, smart sauce bottles, for example, if you just placed them throughout the day in various places where they're going to see it, and then later on say to them, right, can you tell me what your favourite condiment is? Most of the time, because I've had that suggestion all through the day, they're going to say tomato sauce.
Do you not think that's what psychological suggestion we've talked about in regards to paranormal investigation as well? You don't even recognise that you see things, and then all of a sudden you're picking up on something that's come out, and it.
Well, yeah, I mean, we see it in the paranormal field all the time. When you go to places like, for example, Kelvin and Hatch, it's very misunderstood, and a lot of people say they see military personnel there, but on researching the location, it wasn't a military installation, so there would not be any military people there.
No, it's Home Office, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, it was a civil defence.
So it's just what people go and they just assume that it's military, and that's what comes through for them, because it's them putting that suggestion to work.
So I think Georgiana used these to her advantage, in all honesty. I'm not... It sounds like we're almost like medium bashing at this point in time. I have to say, I don't want to come across like that. No. But when we started looking at certain characters, we're trying to look at both sides of the coin here. Yeah. So I don't want to come across as medium bashing, or I don't believe it, because I've worked in this way. I can't explain where it comes from, and I've come up with things that I couldn't possibly have known myself, but I don't know where that's come from. I don't know if that's, I don't know, telepathic interaction, or, psychological clues that I don't even recognise I've picked up on. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I don't know. But all I know is that I have experienced this, and I've seen a lot of mediums work in the field that we work, and we've spoken to a lot of mediums over the time when we're doing podcasts. Don't want to come across as medium bashing. That's one thing I would like to point out. We're just looking at the characters from the Victorian period that were there and looking at it quite coldly. Now, around the Victorian spiritualism, and nowadays I don't think that this is the case so much, but back then it was very heavily women, basically.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, if there's one good thing that come off the back of this, I mean, it was quite liberating for women, wasn't it? It was, it was sort of it was a way out of, a very structured, rigid society which was male-dominated, and women, and even the men, even me today, I would possibly pay more credence to a woman clairvoyant psychic than I would a man.
Really?
Yeah. Don't know why, women, sort of, they're more in tune, I can see where this idea comes from. The woman is more in tune with herself and nature and sort of stuff like that. And it's not too far a leap to think they're probably more spiritually in tune.
I do know where you're coming from, and you know we've established now that Richard's sexist. No, but I do know where you're coming from, because when people say about mediums and stuff, you do sort of jump to that conclusion that women are more in tune, because obviously they've got a feminine side. Most women have got feminine sides, so they're more in touch with their feelings, and I think that's where it sort of stems from, and maybe even going into witchcraft and the cultist work. When someone says, "Oh, witchcraft," 9 times out of 10, you'd assume witch is female.
Yeah, you're right there.
And I think that's sort of where that idea comes from, because when you're talking to spirit, it is kind of an occult, witchcrafty type of subject.
Yeah, but it's interesting to note sort of like witchcraft and a sort of like occult work, but whereas occult work is predominantly male.
Mm.
You know, it's interesting. The sort of like the practice of magic, you know, is predominantly sort of like a male profession, whereas sort of like the more spiritual sort of side, you know, sort of tends to favour the fairer sex.
Mm.
But does it? Because let's throw a boy into the mix here now then. Let's have a look at Robert James Lee. Now, he took part, very young, 13-year-old boy, lived in Leicester. He took part in a family séance. He passed a message from Albert to the Queen, and he called her by a pet name that was only known to her and her late husband. He was then invited to give séances at Windsor Castle.
Right. So, the pet name, was it Mrs. Cuddles, was it, or something like that?
Well, I don't know what that pet name was.
Tiddles.
Tiddles.
I do have, you do have your pet names for your partners, don't you? It'd be interesting to know what it was.
Now,
it was Tiddles, because she had a bladder problem.
Oh dear! Oh my God, boys! Now my guide. Now, basically, Robert James Lee is a very interesting character in his own right. He was a deep trance medium, and he managed to. He's just absolutely, what he was coming out with at that age, at 12, was just astonishing. The perfect use of the English language, philosophical knowledge that he couldn't possibly have known at that age. He gave seances, as I say, convincing evidence of the identity of the spirit he said he got, which was obviously Prince Albert. It just really weird. This guy, what he's done is really weird, but he's not without taint himself. This is the thing I find very difficult, because on one hand you've got this amazing character. When you look into to him, he's just, Robert Lee's, he's fascinating, but then he comes out with a weird Jack the Ripper link, and it's a hoax, and it's not, dates don't fit. But why would you even do that? Do you know what I mean? When you've got a good, credible reputation, and under your own right.
It's like he's young, so I can see why people possibly pay attention. I mean, and you could even sort of like, and if he's sort of saying things that quite possibly a 13-year-old sort of can't actually sort of like possibly are mature enough to like sort of like go into and stuff like that. I mean, I can see why people probably sort of went for him. That was probably a good selling point at the end of it. When I say selling point, a good attraction point.
How far after Prince Albert dying did this 13-year-old come forward?
Pretty soon.
Yeah.
Okay, so it couldn't have been a case of him being reincarnated.
No, I doubt it, because they wanted him to remain at court. Victoria wanted him to remain at court, and that wasn't allowed. But then that's when they brought in John Brown, and this is why they think that John Brown was a psychic medium, and why Victoria had such a connection with John Brown, because he was the psychic medium that they wouldn't allow in John James Lee's. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's more appropriate, I suppose, because he was always a member of the the court anyway. So, I suppose, I don't know, but that's where the link to John Brown being a psychic or a clairvoyant comes from, is because of this situation with Robert James Lees. No for Robert Lees, but yes for John Brown. Is there a clairvoyant link there? But most people think that's not the case at all. They don't. There's nah.
I've only ever come across this in this sort of like the basic research, sort of like you've done, sort of, Kerry. It's sort of I've never sort of, it's never been spoken about sort of beyond sort of like a fringe sort of area like this. I would go with the established sort of. I'd even say she could possibly be married to him at one point, as opposed to this sort of this psychic connection.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's almost like a side note.
Yeah. When
you read about this, and I do think that it's a leap of assumption.
Yeah.
On that one, yeah. I think the courts didn't want. It would have been perceived as a good parlour game, but not to be taken seriously.
Yeah, I mean, the Queen can entertain and who she likes, and obviously, but the court, but the court is quite influential on who has access to the monarch. So, I can see them sort of just kicking him aside if a few people weren't too happy about it.
Which you can see even in modern, we're looking at The Crown, the series The Crown recently.
Mm-hmm.
If you even take it as, yes, it is a work of fiction, but if you look at it based on fact, Margaret wanting to marry the equerry, and she wasn't allowed to, and they got rid of him. The writer who actually helped her maintain her links with the Commonwealth got kicked out because he put forward a point of view that she told him to, and then it went against her, so she got rid of him. There's a lot of pressure from the what Diana would have called the establishment. So no, not to have a clairvoyant medium or a deep trance medium person come in and become part of your cult. No.
Yeah.
But John Brown, who's making you happy and actually lifting you out of this melancholy that's befallen our Queen, yes, because that's a good thing. And he's already a member of the court, so he's already got kind of approval.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. But let's have a look at Lee's link with the Jack the Ripper
You
thing.
did say that word, didn't you, Jack the Ripper? I think everyone's ears pricked up there.
Well, I know, right? Now, Lee's posthumous statement records, so basically this is like in his diary, he became convinced, this was after the third Whitechapel murder, he became convinced that the Ripper was about to strike again. He had a vision of an East End location, a narrow court with a gin palace nearby. He could see the name of the court clearly. He could see the clock on the wall of the gin palace stood at 12:40 a.m. He could see a man and a woman enter a dark corner of the court. The man was sober, the woman worse for drink, and in her state she leaned against the wall for support. The man quickly closed her mouth and drew a knife and slit her throat, dropped her to the ground, stabbed her repeatedly. Coolly wiped his blade on her dress and then walked off into the night. Now, as the story goes, the very next night the Ripper struck in exactly that way, and Lees went to the police with his information, and he consented to try and track Jack the Ripper.
Right.
Like a bloodhound. He felt that there was some magnetic wave connecting him with the fugitive. So Lees then is moving through the streets of London, following this strange magnetic force, and with the police following him. And at about 4 o'clock in the morning, he stopped. He pointed to the gates of a West End mansion and said, "There is your murderer, the man you were looking for." Now, this house belonged to an eminent London surgeon. Now, note that there's no name.
No, it seems to be lacking, doesn't it?
He knocked on the door. The maid answered and said that the doctor was not home, but then they wanted to talk to the doctor's wife. So the wife, then poured out an incredible story. She said that her husband had a dual personality. I'm thinking Jekyll and Hyde here, which was very influential around this time. She knew that at times he could become brutal and an uncontrollable sadist. She had had to lock herself away and her children into a bedchamber to escape his side, his nasty side. And then she said the Ripper murders began, and she noticed that whenever a Whitechapel murder had occurred, her husband was absent.
Okay.
Right, so after hearing this, the inspector called in 2 experts on insanity, and the doctor was sent for. When he was confronted, the doctor admitted that his mind was unbalanced, and there were times when he had complete lapses of memory. And there was one occasion he'd found his shirt front actually soaked with blood. He put that down to a nosebleed. He was actually put under house arrest, while 12 doctors were summoned to constitute a commission in lunacy.
Right, okay.
Right.
He was declared insane, and due to the high social standing of the accused, all parties to the proceedings were sworn to secrecy, so not to cause a scandal. The doctor himself was actually put into a private asylum for the insane, and he was actually lodged under an assumed name, but to account for his disappearance, they did a sham death and burial, and everybody was believing of this. Apparently, allegedly.
Yeah, for sort of... Yeah.
So at that point, did the murders stop?
No, because they would have had... I don't know, yeah. I mean... I don't think this account is actually taken seriously by any ripperologist, is it? I mean, I'm sure we'll have a message from our producer when he hears this.
Well, no. I mean, it might not have been taken seriously, but that could have all been part of this whole cover-up conspiracy.
Well, this actually occurred. This actually was first flouted in the Daily Express of all places in 1931, and that's the only place this story was flouted. His daughter, Lee's daughter, Ava, always maintained the story was true, and that Lee's actually received money for Scotland Yard for the work he had done, capturing the notorious serial killer. But pretty much every single ripperologist thinks this is a complete hoax. This is absolute.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be, and it could also be the inspiration behind the Jekyll and Hyde thing.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the Jekyll and Hyde. Well, we all know the basis. I mean, I don't know when it was published and stuff. It would have been. Yeah, no, I think
it would have been in the Victorian period, though, wouldn't it?
Oh, yes, it would have been. Yes, but
so I don't know the date yet because we didn't research into that bit apart.
No,
so it's still a possibility. Thinking outside the box.
I did try to see if the timeline added up, and basically there isn't one.
No.
There's no date, there's no names of doctors, you know what I mean? You'd think in his diary, at least he would have put a few more details in.
But then they covered it up, and they said that in the...
But then they're supposed to have covered it up. I don't think that this holds water, I'll be honest with you. I don't think so. But it was interesting, it was an interesting link. And if it was true, they've done a very good cover-up story. But it's nowhere else apart from this posthumous note that Robert Lee's put into his diary, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And, I haven't actually seen the diary, so even that could be faked, for all I know. It is generally regarded as a hoax by ripperologists, so that's how I'm going to view that one. But I just thought it was an interesting little sideline.
Yeah, no, it was good.
So anyway, back to Queen Victoria. Now, when she died, Queen Victoria this is, apparently she used to send messages to her last surviving daughter, Princess Louise, through the medium Leslie Flint.
Okay.
Couldn't find any information other than that. Couldn't find much information about that at all, actually. So I left Leslie. I moved on swiftly, shall we say.
Leave him or her to, their sort of one sentence in history, by the looks of it.
Pretty much, right? Now, by the 1860s, spiritualism it was Victorian subculture all over it. It had mediums, all sorts of things were going on. You could have private and public seances, table rapping, table tipping, automatic writing, levitation, communication of all kinds with spirit. And basically, it had totally progressed into what we perceive of it now.
Yeah, and also there seems to be a big penchant during Victorian times to have sort of institutions and societies all sprung up around it as well, wasn't it? And publications as well. So there's a huge industry behind this by now.
Totally. There's a huge belief system now in this movement, and it's great. Now, I had to bring in one of the most famous Victorian mediums, Florence Cook. Now, this is absolutely, honestly, bless her, bless Florence. She materialised during her seances as Katie King. Right, so she got took over by Katie King. Mm-hmm. Florence did in her seances. Now, Katie was the daughter of a spirit called John King, who was actually, in real life, a 17th century buccaneer.
Me hearties.
Now, Florence herself, she was allegedly effective at table turning, automatic writing, levitation, all the things you would expect. And then she would go into a trance and levitate above the heads of her sitters, and her clothes fell off onto the floor, which provided extra thrill.
One of those parties.
Yeah, this is more like it.
Mm-hmm. I thought you'd like this one, guys. Very risque. And she did this under the, it wasn't me, it was Katie King.
Yeah, so at least she kept her modesty intact somehow.
Yeah,
I would say with some of the mediums I know, and they are really good, I'm really so glad that they don't go in for that stuff.
I think it would be awesome. I think it would be so funny.
That would just be so wrong.
So wrong and so funny.
I think maybe they should have 3 sick buckets, maybe. But
maybe, who knows? But as Katie King, when she was under this influence by Katie, she flirted with her sitters, she touched them, she kissed them, she sat on their lap. She was a proper little floozy, is all I'm saying.
They have to pay extra for that.
Well, I know, right? But she was invited, Florence was invited to many reputable, respectable Victorian houses.
I'm not surprised.
Honestly,
I'm not surprised, yeah, because they all wanted a bit of our Florence, didn't they?
Wow, hell yeah. I know, right? Now, let's have a look at Florence Cook a little bit deeper, beyond her flirtatious...
Bad choice of words there, I think.
Beyond her flirtatious split personality, I feel on this one, I think this is a total split personality scenario, because it is just ludicrous when you start looking at it. Now, she was born in Kent. She moved to London when she was 3, and basically she was the eldest of 4 children. In 1870, at the age of 14, she began table rapping experiments with her friends and family. Everybody was surprised with a violent burst of poltergeist activity that happened while she was doing that. Mm-hmm. Now, we've talked about, and Andy, our lovely producer, has said that it's not uncommon for people when they're being psychiatrist
evaluated.
Thank you. Yes, evaluated. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that there are things that can happen under that. Carl Jung has said, said this before as well. So, was this from her, or was it a spirit that had come in and made, poltergeist activity? Who knows? But the spirit responded to her questions through a simple system of yes and no raps. Informed her that yes, she was a medium, and then directed her to the local Spiritualist Association. Mm-hmm. She started working with some established mediums, Frank Hearn and Charles Williams, men again, just saying, and reports of her seances actually began to crop up in the spiritualist press, so she's starting to become well known. Mm. Now, Frank Hearn's spirit guide was an entity named John King, who claimed to be the ghost of Sir Henry Morgan, the famous buccaneering pirate. So you've got pseudonyms going on left, right and centre here. Yeah. Now, this is influence. Now, all of a sudden, we've got spirit guides coming in. He's got the dad, she's got the daughter.
Right. Seems to be a right family affair going on over there in the spirit world.
So Katie King's other name was Annie Owens Morgan. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you've got this, They're all, God, how confusing for everybody, right? Now, at this point, there was none of the bodily manifestations of Kate. So this is all simple, there were simply disembodied voices, messages written by unseen hands, and apports, which are objects that appear to fall from the ceiling.
So pretty standard sort of seance-y sort of stuff.
Easily fake stuff, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, now there's a fascinating little story I thought I'd include. That in the June of 1871, Hearn and Williams were conducting a séance together. There were 8 sitters around the table when the voices of Katie King and her father were heard, and Katie offered to produce a gift for the group. One of the sitters suggested that she should bring them Agnes Guppy, an extremely stout medium famed for her own apports. Now, she lived some miles away in Highbury, right? Kate laughed, everybody laughed, and though her father protested, she agreed to go through with it. Suddenly, there was a loud thump, somebody screamed, and then when somebody actually decided to light the lamp, this is all done in darkness at this point, right? There on the table in front of them, apparently in some kind of trance, was Mrs. Guppy, in a state of semi-undress, account book and pen still in hand.
That must have been a sight.
How amazing. She managed to apport an actual person from her house in Highbury to this seance on the middle of the table. Can you imagine? If only that were true.
Yeah.
We don't know. We've only got the story, but it's a good story, right?
Absolutely.
That's a cracker, yeah. I mean, I haven't heard, I've heard of sort of manifestations of obvious stuff, but sort of that, no. And that's new to me.
And conveniently, she was undressed as well.
Wow. Katie seems to like a bit of the undressed state, doesn't she?
Didn't she?
Poor old Mrs. Guppy.
Sure she weren't one of these witches that dance around naked and things. And...
yeah, sky-clad.
Well, she was the daughter of a buccaneer. All I'm saying. Now, in 1873, Florence actually began performing her own seances at her home, basically. And by now, they were full-blown materialisations. Now, the audience, very respectable professional men and women, dimly lit parlour. Florence was bound by ropes. Bondage going on now.
These buccaneers, I tell you, I don't think I've ever seen buccaneers like that in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Wow, they're all a bit
Gonna have to watch that again, I think.
You go for it.
She then retired to an adjoining room, screened off from view with a thin curtain. Presently, the spirit of Katie King would then appear dressed in white and walk about the room telling the story of her former life as Annie Morgan. What a lovely tale.
Yeah.
Was Annie Morgan, was she a wife of a buccaneer then?
No, she was the daughter.
Okay.
She was the daughter.
I wonder if she was the daughter of Captain Morgan.
the rum giant.
Yeah, the rum king, yeah.
Now, she had a whole backstory. Annie would talk about her life. She said she was 12 years old when Charles I was beheaded. She'd married. She'd had 2 children. She committed more crimes than she cared to confess. She'd even murdered men with her own 2 hands, and she'd died young. To questions concerning the reason for her reappearance on Earth, she claimed that it was part of the work she'd been entrusted with to convince the world of the truth of spiritualism.
A woman on a mission, then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Florence held a series of sittings designed to capture a photographic likeness of Katie. So she's trying to prove it. She's not just doing, she's going ahead with this. I want to prove it, so let's get a photograph of it. Now, Mr. W.H. Harrison, a reporter for the Daily Telegraph, successfully managed to take the first 4 photographs of Kate.
Okay.
Now, I've seen these photos.
Yes, you've included a couple of them here, haven't you?
They look far too real. Looks like a real person. But then what would you expect a spirit to materialise as? A wispy shape, headless, I don't know. I don't know, is the answer to the question. I kind of think that although Florence is bound, she's hidden behind a curtain. Could another person have entered the room in this dimly lit state, or in blacked out room? Is it that? I don't know. I mean, again, I'm sounding very cynical, but who knows?
Yeah, I'm sceptical on this one too.
You sort of look at it, it's classic Victoriana, isn't it? It's just sort of like, the cabinet, the curtain and everything. I mean, this is, no, I say.
She's like one step away from ectoplasm.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we'll go on to ectoplasm in a minute. Right, now she also sat for respected scientist William Crookes, who took 44 photographs of Kate at his home in Regent's Park, all the while performing tests on Florence as part of his ongoing investigation into spiritualist mediums. Now, Florence is fast becoming famous, and she's prepared to put herself up, right? But there's a lot of jealousy surrounding her. At a séance held on the 9th of December in 1873, a lawyer, William Volkman, seized Katie King by the waist and refused to let go.
Okay.
Some of those present claimed that the spirit glided out of Volkman's grip, and others suggested she defended herself quite vigorously. Volkman actually lost half of his beard. Now, again, what does that suggest?
Go on.
Edward Corner, a ship's captain from Dalston, was a neighbour of the Cooks, as well as being a close family friend. Together with another of her supporters, rushed to Katie's aid. The gas lights were rapidly extinguished, a great deal of scuffling going on, and by the time everything was generally restored and the room was relit, Kate had obviously vanished, and Florence Cook was discovered still secured by her ropes. Funny that.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it?
Yeah, it looks like the bouncers come in and ejected the troublemaker.
Now, Volkman was most likely in league with Agnes Guppy. Now, remember Agnes Guppy? She was the medium that apparently laid on the table in a state of undress. He'd actually
probably
married...
had a score to settle being aported to her house in semi-undress whilst doing the books.
Now, he married her. Volkman had married Guppy. Right? So, it would seem, maybe, that Florence's relationship with her colleague had soured, and Volkman was there to debunk her.
Certainly sounds like it, doesn't it?
So maybe Katie hadn't materialised her at all. Maybe they were in cahoots, everybody. Now, Volkman the attack actually did damage her reputation. And at Crookes reports, notes of an inquiry into the phenomenon called spiritual during the years 1870-1873, that was published in the Quarterly Journal of Science, didn't do a lot to restore it, despite his vehement assertions that Florence Cook, Katie Fox, and Daniel Douglas Home, which I haven't gone into in this one, but Daniel Douglas Home is a fascinating case in itself.
Yeah.
They were all genuine mediums producing perfectly genuine results. When you look at that, though, his methods are flawed for a scientific study. He's a believer.
Yes.
He's a believer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, seances continued. Florence carried on. She met up with another girl called Mary Rosina Showers, and the pair gave seances. Now we've got two of them at the go. More witnesses in 1874 attended Barrister Sergeant at Arms Edward William Cox. Now Cox, not uncritical. He had an interest in spiritualism, and it was he who first hosted and championed Daniel Holmes. Okay, now he published his observations some weeks later, again in a leading newspaper. And he basically said they were solid flesh and blood and bone. They breathed and perspired and ate. Not merely did they resemble their respective mediums, they were alike in face, hair, complexion, teeth, eyes, hands, and movements of the body. Basically, the mediums are foiling you.
They were one of the same person.
Yeah, both girls were materialising as somebody else in the room, and we know it from Harry Houdini. It's not impossible to get out when you're tied up. And let's be fair, they're not going to be tied up by any, sophistication, are they? They're literally going to be tied to a chair. We know that you can get out of that quite easily these days. Harry Houdini proved that point.
Well, yeah.
Escapism, isn't it? Is it called that?
Yeah, escapology.
Thank you.
And, sort of when you've been tied up, and there are techniques, and even the military are actually trained in this sort of, if you're captured and they tie you up, you tense yourself up, you bloat yourself out, sort of expand yourself as they're tying, and of course when they go off, you can relax, and and that slackens the ropes.
So, that could be what the girls were doing. He said that no proof whatsoever was given or offered or permitted. The fact might have been established in a moment beyond all doubt by the simple process of opening the curtain and exhibiting the two ladies then and there upon the sofa wearing their black gowns. But this certain evidence was not proffered, nor indeed was it allowed us. Now, and this is where we go, isn't it, with these kind of seances. If someone sat there right in front of you and then you get another spirit body coming into the room, you can see the medium right in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes it completely different. When they're behind a curtain and you can't see them, and their mannerisms and their hair and their eyes and their hands and all that is very similar to what to the girls that you've met half hour before. You it does kind of fake is what I'm screaming here. Fake.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you get all that sort of stuff with the Archers, didn't you?
Yeah.
When they're doing that radio show, the Archers, and they're walking across muddy fields, what they're doing is actually splashing some boats.
Oh
yeah.
The good old radio dramas.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's sort of the thing I reckon they were doing.
Quite possibly. I think it's telling. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Now, Florence Cook actually married the neighbour who rushed to Katie's aid at that infamous Volkmann scenario that we talked about. And they had two daughters, Katie and Edith, but it was not a happy one. The final appearance of Katie King was actually a very sad occasion. She had often stated that she could not appear on this earth beyond the month of May in 1874. So on the 21st, she assembled her friends together to bid them all goodbye.
Oh.
It's very dramatic.
It is, isn't it?
I kind of want to put my palm to my forehead. And
when are they doing the movie of this?
Swoon. This was written down by stage actress and internationally successful author Florence Marriott. She said that Katie, the spirit, had asked Miss Cook to provide her with a large basket of flowers and ribbons, and she sat on the floor and made up a bouquet for each of her friends to keep in remembrance of her. Mine, which consists of lilies of the valley and pink geranium, look almost as fresh today, nearly 17 years after, as it did when she gave it to me. It was accompanied by the following words, which Katie wrote on a sheet of paper in my presence. From Annie Owen de Morgan, alias Kate, to her friend Florence Marriott Roschurch, with love, Pensez à moi, with the date. Gosh, honestly, it's Victorian melodrama all over this, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's got everything really, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awful. Now, she didn't just go. She had to keep popping back for one last look, especially at Mr. Alfred Williams Crooks. Apparently, she was as attached to him as she was to her. No,
right.
They were attached to each other, basically.
So
I said that wrong.
So her spirit retired, but like sort of aging rock bands, they keep coming back and doing farewell tours.
That's it, yeah.
Well, yeah, but on the same evening. So, she'd go, I'm going now.
Right.
And then she'd go, I can't go. And then she'd go. I can't leave you, all my friends. Oh, and then go again. And then, no, I can't. I just can't. But she did. Anyway, William Crooks himself wrote, having concluded her directions, Katie invited me into the cabinet with her and allowed me to remain there to the end. After closing the curtain, she conversed with me for some time, and then she walked across the room to where Miss Cook was lying senseless on the floor. Stooping over her, Katie touched her and said, "Wake up, Florrie, wake up. I must leave you now." Miss Cook then woke and tearfully entreated Kate to stay a little time longer. "My dear, I can't. My work is done. God bless you." For several minutes the two were conversing with each other, till at last Miss Cook's tears prevented her from speaking. Following Kate's instructions, I then came forward to support Miss Cook, who was falling onto the floor, sobbing hysterically. I looked around, but the white-robed Katie had gone. Pure misdirection, I feel.
Yeah. Well, very dramatic. It's very melodrama, isn't it? I mean, you know, that could be written for the stage.
Yeah, you sure this isn't like a screenplay of like one of Shakespeare's ones or something?
No, this is pure Victoria. Pure Victorian mediumship.
Pure BS, I think.
Oh dear. Anyway, basically, he says that he is absolutely convinced that William Crook was not lying about what he saw. I don't think he was lying. I think he saw exactly what the girls wanted him to see. Yeah, and I think pure misdirection of "please come support my Florrie, as I'm going to just disappear out the back door."
Well, yeah, let's think about it. Yeah, you've probably got a male there, and a couple of girls sort of wandering around in distress or doing whatever. You know, there's a lot of sort of a bit of flattery and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, you can see what's going on.
Sleight of hand, but on a bigger scale is how I'm reading that. Now, Kate never appeared again. Thank goodness. Is all I'm saying. But Florence actually went on to have 2 further spirit guides during her lifetime. Now, when we talk spirit guides, in this way, they're coming forward, materialising, doing their thing. Nowadays, spirit guides don't come forward like that, do they?
Well, no. Whenever I hear, sort of people talk about spirit guides, they, they just sort of say, "Oh, my spirit," and you never see them.
No.
You always have to sort of place your faith in the person that's telling you, that their spirit guide is conversing with them and giving them certain information.
Mm-hmm. Now, the first one was Layla in 1875. Now, the year is quite prevalent on this one because do you remember when she first started, she was working with 2 male mediums, Frank Hearn.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of basically set Florence on a career path. He was actually debunked as a fraud in the same year that she was channeling Layla. And she also had a French girl who called herself Marie and was actually said to dance and sing in a very professional manner.
Oh.
5 years on, Florence was gross grabbed for a second time, on this occasion by the young George Sitwell, a 20-year-old Oxford University student, at a public séance that was being given at the rooms of the National British Association of Spiritualists in 1880. Now, this ruined her. She retired and moved to Wales, but the incident did bring notoriety to Sir George, and he soon left Oxford without taking a degree.
Right.
So he grabbed his notoriety, but basically Florence was I can't be being grabbed, I just can't. Yeah. Now, in 1899, she tried to revive her career, and she was invited to Berlin to undertake a series of seances under test conditions by the Sphinx Society, but she died of pneumonia in basic poverty, so she didn't get fame and fortune from this. Is the thing.
That's just typical, isn't it? The only chance they get to study her, and it's just a complete cop out, and she goes and dies.
How dare she?
I know. Some of those people annoy me. You know what I
mean? But again, we've got this mental image of a dimly lit parlour room with people sitting around, and they're believing the hype of this scenario that's going on. And this is the problem, isn't it? And we all want to go, how many times have we heard in the field, let's create a typical Victorian seance?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. It's, a lot of people do actually say this, and that is usually fired by this sort of image of Victorian seances, because they sound quite dramatic affairs.
They are
They
very
have
dramatic
everything.
affairs. I know.
So I can see the attraction.
Having said this, I have knowledge, shall I say, of a situation that happened, and it was on a psychic weekend, and the person that went is very, very reputable. I'm not going to say the name, it's not my place to say, but what was recounted to me about what happened and the measures that they were allowed to take before the seance began and what occurred during the seance was, well, if it hadn't have come from the person who was telling me, I kind of would have been like, no. But they were like, we inspected the room. We inspected all the equipment on the table. We were allowed to touch down, as it were, like frisk the people involved. We all had bands on, like fluorescent bands, so we could see hands and feet throughout the seance. Because it was in darkness, but we had these fluorescent bands, so you could see if somebody was like lifting a table up, for example, you'd have been able to see hands lifting the table up. You know what I mean? There was like bands were put on the table as well, so you could see that it was done like that. And I have to say, what was some of the phenomena that was achieved through this, outstanding.
But then, I totally agree with what you're saying, especially if they were credible. But on the other hand, it doesn't always necessarily have to be the team that could fake it. It could also be rigged by the owners of the location to happen at certain times and things like that. I mean, I know it's a lot of mucking about, but it's still a possibility.
If you want the notoriety for your location,
I'm assuming because this person is a credible person, then I would have assumed from that they actually tore that place apart, looking for expressions.
Oh, they were looking for stuff. They were there ripping. I mean, she goes, if I hadn't have witnessed it with my own eyes, if I hadn't have been in that, in that situation, if I hadn't have done the measures I'd done, she goes, I can't believe I'm telling you. She said, I still can't believe it, but I know the measures I took. Does that that make sense? She said, phenomenal. She goes, it has made her question her scepticism. It really did make her question scepticism. However, we've talked about many ways that you can be fooled tonight. And we've shone a light, particularly on Victorian spiritualism and seances, and shown that for something we take quite seriously, I suppose, that's a yardstick, isn't it?
Yeah.
Victorian spiritualism and seances, something we take so, credibly. We've looked at some of the cases, and when you read deeper into these cases, you can't help but go, really? Come on now. Really? People fell for this? But then we've got a very modern way of looking at it, and you have to put yourself in the time. Put ourselves fast forward to now. We're born and bred on television programs.
Yeah.
That say one word isn't of an EVP, and what you're told to hear, and an orb is spirit manifestation, and all of these things, knocks and raps. Did you hear that? No, I didn't hear that. What did you hear? Oh, let's replay that bit again. Do you know what I mean? All these kind of things are still flouted as evidence of the paranormal, when research has been done and debunked a lot of this, of psychological influences, physical problems, that we have with our eyes or our ears. We've talked about this many, many times. I'm not saying that I'm not a believer, because I do believe in spirit. But when I'm looking for evidence, when I'm looking for evidence, a lot of it you have to view very much through the spectrum of the time you live in. And we have to look back at Victorian spiritualism and do the same. So in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time, we could look back at this time now and go, how did we believe that a voice recorder could pick up the voice of a spirit, or, an EMF reader could pick up a electromagnetic anomaly, and we took that as spirit. We don't know, but we have to look at it.
You can imagine
that if that happened, there would still be people that were adamant that it is a spirit.
Well, yeah, but I can see where you're coming from, Kerry. I can imagine sort of watching or reading research done in 50 years' time, and sort of like a paragraph saying, well, in the early 2000s, it was widely believed that and as you said, voice recorders could pick up spirits, and stuff like that. I can imagine it being said like that.
Who knows? But looking into the Victorian seances and spiritualism, I mean, who knows? People believed Margaret Fox, or Maggie Fox. 1 minute she was, blowing the world away with her mediumist. Then she said it was all faked, proved how she faked it. Then came out and said, no, the spirit guide's saying recount that. That's not true. And then she does it again and then proves that she was faking it again under a pseudonym. It's very confusing. It becomes very confusing. But belief systems were born back in the Victorian period, and some of those are still very prevalent in the field today.
Yeah, definitely.
And we have to be very careful what we view our spectrum of the paranormal or spiritualism through.
Yeah.
On that note, we've actually come to the end of the show.
That was a goodie. Enjoyed that one.
Yeah.
Certainly an eye-opener. I have to say, when I was looking at some of the cases and some of the mediums, it's certainly an eye-opener. And who knows? What do I know, eh? All I'm saying on that one.
We can but try and explore and experiment, can't we?
We can, and we have got a belief system, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it.
No, that's right.
I'll do it for fun.
But you still got a belief system now.
Yeah.
On that note, say goodnight, guys.
Good night, guys.
Good night, guys.